Okay. So you can hear me all right, yeah?
Yes.
Yes, cool. Um, Welcome to Hotbed Summer. So everybody here has received quite a lot of emails from me, but we just thought whilst we've got people here in person, we can just let you know what to expect and answer any questions that you have at the end as well. So as you would have seen on the emails and on the web page, Hotbed Summer is a series of events, and you're welcome to join as many of the events or as few as you would like, depending on your availability and what your priorities are. We have added one event very recently, and there might be a few more events that come up over the course of the 6 weeks. So we'll always keep you updated via email, but just double check on Luma as well. We've mentioned this in the email, and I know lots of people have already signed up, but you need to sign up individually for each event that you're interested in so that you receive the reminders and that kind of thing. So if you want to come to Sam's AMA next Monday afternoon, just make sure that you signed up to it. We're going to be letting people know every week what the upcoming events are for the week. So if there is anything new, you'll be notified then. You can also follow Hotbed on Luma, and it will send you a push notification if there are any events that are added. There is one specific event, which is going to be an in-person event on the 29th of August, which we're co-hosting with Rare Founders. It is not yet publicized, but save the date. We're going to be letting you know about it within the next week or so. A lot of you as well will already be a member of our community WhatsApp group. Last week, we did a big consolidation of our WhatsApp group. So we have two WhatsApp groups within our community. One is for all founders in the Hotbed community. There's about 310 founders in that WhatsApp group. And one of them is specifically for founders that have raised 150K and are raising again to ask any questions about raising seed. So we will send something around after this, or we'll put something in the chat as well throughout the course of today with the links. Feel free to join. The WhatsApp group is just an informal place where you can connect with like-minded founders, ask questions, share best practice, that kind of thing. We also sent you an onboarding pack last week, which has details of who our partners are. So our partners, you're going to be hearing from the majority of them over the course of this program if you're signed up for one of their sessions, but Deal, NovaBook, Seed Legals, Daedalus, and Zendesk for startups. Without them, we wouldn't be able to put on this kind of event series completely for free for founders. So we really appreciate all of their support, and all of them have given a exclusive discount as well to all the founders that have gone through Hotbed Summer. So take a look at the onboarding pack to get access to the discount codes or any hyperlinks, and drop us an email if you have any specific questions about the partners and how you can connect with them. Do you want to do the quick intro?
Sure. So a little bit more about Hotbed. Perdie and I are the co-founders. We launched Hotbed in May of 2022. And since then, we ran over 9 programs that supported over 600 founders across 40 different countries. Our programs are delivered virtually, which really means we're able to support founders all around the world and with different schedules, and gives us a lot more flexibility. And then we also do a number of in-person events every single year too. So we have our upcoming one, Founders Camp, which is our big event of the year. We host it twice. It's a full day of content, and we like to say it's like the anti-conference conference. Because it's informal, it's fun, but you hear from speakers like the co-founder of WeWork who joined us the last time. And we'll be announcing some of our speakers for our upcoming one on October 4th very shortly. And then we also do investor founder speed dating events. Sometimes they're attached to programs, and then we also do ad hoc events as well. So our next investor founder speed dating event will be October 22nd. That's also going to be announced publicly shortly, but just keep an eye out for that if that's something that you'd be interested in. And then on top of that, we do a lot of deck reviews. So today's session is, of course, about your deck. And that is something that we have seen many of, both from the founders in our programs and just from being in the ecosystem for so long. And so before we move on to the next slide, when we will jump into things, please, over the coming weeks, remember this is a completely safe space for you to ask any questions that you might not want to ask anywhere else. Like if there's ever a term we use that you don't know, just ask. If there's something that you're confused about, just put it in the chat. It's friendly. Everyone's an early stage founder here, and we want you to make the most of the community that you'll find here at Hotbed. Okay, so let's jump into things. So the average person can only hold about 7 items in their memory at one time, which means if you have a slide like this, it's going to be nearly impossible for an investor to be able to understand and digest what you're trying to tell them, right? You'll notice in here, there's a lot of colors, there's a lot of imagery, there's different fonts being used. So the information that you're trying to convey isn't the information that's going to be received from the investors. So over the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to walk you through how you can build your deck in a way that's going to land and resonate with investors, and how you can distill the key bits of information just in about 11 or 12 slides. So if you have slides like this and you have a 25 slide deck, it's over 125 pieces of information that you're trying to tell your investor in like a 5 minute time frame. And then remember, if they're only having 7 things in their working memory at one time, chances are you aren't going to be all 7, and they're probably going to be thinking about, you know, their kid who's at home sick. Oh, they need to go to the gym, but they forgot their trainers. What are they having for dinner? Oh, shoot, I hate my job. I need to find a new one. So like that's already 4 things or 5 things. So they only have 2 or 3 more places left for you. And so bear that in mind as you're designing your deck. So one of the things that we've seen work best for founders is trying to decide the one thing that you want to convey to the investor on each of the 11 slides that you'll have. So we can move to the next one. Oh, actually, I thought it was a different slide next, but a few other things before we jump into the format of the slide. Make sure that you don't have everything designed in a way that is very difficult for investors, or I don't want to say investors. Investors are just people, for people to be able to read and understand. Because so this font that you'll see underneath the big text, that's size 30. So you should be able to fit everything that you want to say into on a slide in that font. But if you have it condensed in a prose-like format, next slide, you'll see it's pretty much impossible to read. So you don't want paragraphs, you want short, condensed text that is very easy to read and understand. So let's talk about.
And can I just jump in quickly? For some reason, it won't let me allow these 2 people from the waiting room into the main room.
Oh no, okay, let me get them in.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, they're entering it now. Perfect. Okay. Okay, so these are the 11 slides that you're going to want to have. Before anyone asks, we will be sharing these slide decks with everyone afterwards. So if you're taking notes, don't worry about getting all of this information down. So the 11 slides that you want to have, intro, cover slide, problem, solution, which is going to include the product. That might turn into 1 or 2 slides. Some people will do a solution and then a product slide. If that's you, that's okay. Next one, market opportunity, competition, business model, go-to-market strategy, traction, team, why now, and then ask/contact details. So that's a lot of information, but rather than focusing on the information, you want to focus on the points you want to get across, which includes, perfect. I'm not going to read through all of these. Again, you'll have this information and we're going to go over it in more detail shortly. But the key takeaway I want all of you to have on this slide is that it's less about the actual information that you include on the slide, and more the question that you should be asking yourself is, if someone spends 10 seconds on this slide, what are they going to walk away feeling? And so these takeaways, you'll notice most of them are actually feelings. So you want the person reading it to feel intrigued. You want them to feel a bit of empathy for the customer and the pain point. Oh my gosh, there's a siren going on outside. I hope you can't hear it. It's really loud. You want them to have clarity, and then it goes down to excitement, excitement, excitement. And so we're going to walk you through how you can convey that, but please make sure that's the question that you're asking yourself as you are designing your slide deck. All right, so cover slide, this one is pretty straightforward. Keep it nice and simple. Logo, name of your company, and then one-liner. Make sure your one-liner is actually something that like includes normal words and a normal person can understand. Sometimes as founders, like we know ourselves, it's so easy when you're in the weeds of your business to like come up with a description that you think perfectly summarizes what you do. And then normal humans read it and they're like, what do you do? What is it? I would say probably like 60 to 70% of the one-liners we see, even being in the tech world, we read it and we're like, I don't know what this is. So you don't have to just say, you don't have to say everything that you do. It's one sentence. You're not gonna paint a super clear picture on what you do, but it should give some indication of what it is. Sometimes if it sounds too esoteric, you end up just sounding very out of touch. And then lastly, make sure it's pretty and it's something that gets people excited to want to see more. Okay, now the problem that you are solving. There's the text on here I think is pretty self-explanatory, so I'll let you read over it. The two things that how we see people go wrong on the problem slide is one, they might be operating in an industry that chances are a founder or an investor has already seen a lot of pitches from, or maybe they already invest in that sector, or it's a wide societal problem that people already understand pretty well. So this might be something like climate change, for example. Like if you are doing a reusable clothing marketplace, it's possible that you could fall into this trap. And this trap is when people over-explain the bigger issue, but don't really talk about it in a way that indicates that you have a unique insight on the problem. So if you are doing a reusable clothing marketplace and you use your problem slide to just talk about how big of an issue the fashion industry, how the fashion industry contributes to global warming, you're really missing the opportunity to show that you have a unique perspective on this problem. So that's trap number one. And that is if you're trying to solve a big problem. Trap number two, oh wait, can we go back? Trap number two for the problem side is if you operate in a really niche market and you go in super specific on your problem without giving the investor, I'm just going to stop saying investor, human, without giving the person enough context to be able to understand why that problem is significant. So if you do something in like, I don't know, let's say manufacturing and there's a problem with a machine and you talk about how this machine has a lot of flaws and I don't know, has a lot of issues and needs a bunch of maintenance. If you just go in saying that, people are gonna be like, okay, I get it's a problem, but like, I don't care, you know? So in that situation, you might want to talk about how it defaults this amount of times, which costs the company X amount of money to bring in someone to fix it. And the lost hours could equal this amount of merchandise being produced, something like that, that gives people a better perspective on how the problem translates to lost revenue or something that's a real pain point. Okay, next slide. Okay, solution slide. So again, this is going to be like your solution and your product slide. Some people might do, as I was saying, like the solution first, and that's going to be kind of like the bigger picture of the solution. And then your product will be how that solution has manifested itself into perhaps like a piece of software, a platform, a physical product, whatever. Make sure that there's a very clear link between the problem and the solution. Again, you're probably like, oh my gosh, that's so obvious. Why are you talking about that? Because probably like 80% of the decks we see do not include a clear link from the problem to the solution. Now, the tricky part is that's easier to do if you are verbally pitching, right? Because Perdie's going to talk a bit about the importance of storytelling and how you can weave that into your pitch. So that's easy to do if you're with the person, you're walking them through it. But if you're just sending them a static deck, that's something that can be lost in translation. So please pay attention to that. And then you want to talk about the benefits as opposed to the specific features. If you're doing a different solution product slide, you can drill down into the more specific features on the product slide. But still, when people go straight to the features, you're missing out on what the solution and the product slide is meant to deliver to the person reading it, which is that like aha, that excitement, that clarity. And so you're not going to be delivering them with the emotion that you want them to get from this slide. So this is also a great place to include a product shot if you have them. Again, that's just a great way to indicate that you have an actual product in the first like 2-3 slides, which will instantly set you apart from many of the decks that investors see. I'm just also going to add here, please include any questions you have in the chat, ask, raise your hand, use the little Zoom feature if you have any. We'll try to get through questions at the end, but if you have any in the meantime, just ask. Okay, next slide. So business opportunity. This is a weird slide because at the end of the day, the TAM, SAM, and SOM, you can honestly get these numbers to say whatever you want them to say. Like there's so many different ways to calculate this. We're not going to walk you through how to calculate the 3 different like TAM, SAM, and SOM. If you don't know how to do it, just message us. It's no big deal. We just don't have time to cover it. We have a lot of articles that we can send over to you, recommend if you need help calculating that. But at the end of the day, it's really you kind of just pull it out of the hat, which is horrible to say. And it's frustrating because as a founder, if you're putting something on your deck, like you want to feel confident that it's true. But the point of this slide should be to indicate to investors that you are solving a big problem and that there's a big upside if you are able to solve this problem. So when they see this, they're wondering, they want to see, I was going to say dollar sign, I'm American, as you can probably tell, but it would be pound sign. So they want to see pound sign, pound sign, pound sign. So total addressable market, ideally they want to see it in the billions. The bigger billions, the better. And if your largest, the total addressable market is going to be the largest market that you could possibly go after. And if that is a smaller number, if that's in the millions, it's going to be difficult to get a conversation with investors, which again is kind of frustrating because these numbers are kind of made up. But that's just something to bear in mind. All founders feel the pain point when they're creating the slide. Okay, competition. So competition, you see the little grid and the graph icon. A lot of people will do one of these 2 diagrams to talk about the competition. Now, a word of warning before we talk about that is some founders are wary about talking about the competition because if your competition is really well funded or really well known, they're worried that investors are going to lose interest in them. Again, it comes back to storytelling. One of the good things about having a competition that's well funded is that other investors, again, they're people, and it's kind of nerve-wracking to invest in a space no other investor has ever invested in the space, and in a way not even validated the space. And so if they see, oh, hey, Andreessen Horowitz actually has invested in a company that's different than yours, but in the same market, that can oftentimes be a positive signal to them. Another great thing to talk about in the competition slide is any recent exits and acquisitions that have taken place in the space, even if it's from the competition. Because if they can see, oh, wow, a company exited for, 300-400 million recently in the space, especially if you're in a new market, that can be a really positive sign. So going back to the graph and the matrices, these are the 2 ways that most people will talk about their competition. So if you're doing a graph, you choose kind of 2 different aspects that you want to compare yourself against your competition. You're going to graph it out. You can Google this slide if you want to get a perfect example of what the graph would look like. It's going to be the X and Y axis are going to be different for every single startup. And then for the matrix, across the top, you'll put like the 3 to 4 competitors, and then down the side, you choose the attributes that you think are most important to the customer. Where people will go wrong is that they'll choose, maybe they'll choose to talk about the pricing, the exact customer demographic, like the top 2 to 3 features, and then they'll choose some like totally random 4th one that they think is a big deal, and that they'll use it to show, oh yeah, we offer this and the other competition doesn't. But from the investor's point of view, they don't understand why that feature makes sense. So if you're going to do that, make sure that the narrative is clear. Okay, moving on. Business model, very important, and also sadly something that is very easily skipped over. So an investor needs to leave this slide knowing if you are B2B or B2C. If you're B2B, who do you sell to? Is it SMEs? Is it enterprise customers? What's that like? If you are already revenue generating, this will come up more in the traction slide, but this can be an opportunity to talk about that as well. And then if you do have any projections, put them on here. You do not need to go too in depth about financial projections, which is something that we'll talk about later on, and why you don't want to do that. But again, this is so basic and so many people skip it. You need to be crystal clear on how you plan to make money. All right, go to market strategy. Actually, sorry, one other tip I'm going to add on the business model slide. A lot of founders, when they put down their pricing, will hear the feedback from investors. Hey, I think this is underpriced. That's okay. We have hosted so many workshops on pricing and brought in so many incredible founders to talk about their pricing strategy. These are founders who are like scaled, exited. Every single one of them says, honestly, we don't know what we're doing with pricing. So if you feel a little uncomfortable putting your pricing on the slide and you're worried about pushback, that's okay. In fact, it's a good conversation starter if you get any follow-up questions on that. Okay, go to market strategy. This is a really, really, really important slide. Less about the actual strategy and more about what it indicates to the investor. So if you have a go-to-market strategy, I'm just gonna say, let's say you're B2C, you have a consumer product. And your go-to-market strategy, you're just launching for the first time. And your go-to-market strategy is, okay, we're going to advertise on Instagram, we're going to contact some influencers, and we're going to use some Facebook advertisements. That doesn't indicate that you have any unique perspective on the market, the customer. You have no competitive advantage, and you don't have industry contacts you can utilize, and you're not doing anything creative. That sounds harsh, but that's how investors are going to be viewing the go-to-market strategy. They want to see that you're able to bring this product to life in a way that's interesting and compelling and well thought out and not cookie cutter. There's this great tweet I saw. I don't remember who I saw it from. I think it actually may have been from Harry Stebbings, and he talked about one of the biggest differences he's seen in first-time founders versus second-time founders is first-time founders, before they've launched, are focused on the product. Second-time founders are all focused about the go-to-market strategy. So please don't overlook the importance of this slide and having content that is going to wow and excite the investors. Okay, next one. Traction. Again, something that is really important and you think everyone would want to include on their deck, but is often forgotten. Please, 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 especially if you are revenue generating, make sure that's included in the deck. And now, if you do have revenue, you need to be crystal clear on where that revenue comes from. A big red flag to investors is if you portray your revenue as one type of revenue when in fact it's a different type. So oftentimes founders will get themselves into a little bit of hot water if they talk about how their business model is monthly SaaS fee. And then they get to the traction slide and they say, oh, we've had 100K in revenue. And investors thinking, oh my gosh, you have 100K in MRR. This is crazy. I'm so excited. And then they start asking a few questions, and then they find out that the 100K is actually from consulting fees and they're doing something kind of different. And this really sad thing about that is, one, you've damaged the investor's trust, but number two, you've made your revenue, which is a positive thing, into a negative thing. So if you have revenue that doesn't come from the main source of revenue that you'll have in the future, that's fine, but don't lead an investor on to think it's one thing when it's another thing. Just be super upfront that, oh, hey, this is from consulting fees. And that's not a bad thing. Again, you just need clarity. Traction may also be user count. Again, if you have users, be clear whether or not they're paid users or they're free users. If you have LOIs, make sure it's crystal clear whether they're signed or whether you've just sent them out and they're not signed. If you're in conversations in general, I would say don't include that in the deck and instead verbally say that. It just gives you a bit more flexibility, and it kind of gives you the option to manage that narrative a little bit more. Like if you send out a deck one week that says you're in conversations with someone, and then 5 days later that person cuts off the conversation and says, hey, we're not interested, then that's a little trickier to navigate. And pre-orders is great, waitlist is great. Traction is going to look different for every business, but make sure you include it if you can. Okay, next slide. Team. This one is pretty straightforward. Make sure you talk about your team, not just why, not just who you are, but why you're doing what you do, why you're the right person to build the company. You don't need to write a whole paragraph and a whole monologue here. But if you have information that can easily be conveyed, like I'm the former CPO at blah, 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 include that in there. Please, please, please do not be humble. Include everything that can help you. Also, one of the I don't want to say controversial, it's a little too strong. One of the things investors tend to have mixed feelings on is whether or not The team slide should include advisors. Some people will see advisors on the slide and be like, oh, why do you include the advisors? I don't care. They're not the one building the company. I would just say include it if you have advisors who are impressive. At the end of the day, if it is someone impressive, even if someone doesn't really want to see the advisor on this slide, they'll still probably be impressed. So include that if you feel like it's right for your business. So there's one other thing I forgot to say on the competition side. We don't need to go back, but investors tend to have really strong opinions whether or not you display the information on your competition in a grid versus a matrix. And if you go with the matrix, chances are you're going to get investors who say, I only want to see the graph. And if you do the graph, you're going to get someone who says, I only want to see the matrix. Choose whatever you're most comfortable with, and then no, you're going to get pushback either way. Sorry. Okay. Last slide on, oh no, second to last slide on your deck. Why now? This one's really important, really, really important. And this is kind of your final opportunity to convey a sense of urgency. And this is where you want to get the investor feeling on a complete high and like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I want to go tell the investment team this. I want to go tell my other angel investor friend this. I want to research more. I want to reach out immediately. And so this is where you can talk about, you could mention recent exits. So instead of putting it on the competition side, you could put recent exits in the industry here, you want to convey why this problem needs to be solved right now, and how if they don't invest in you, someone else is going to solve it and someone else is going to make a bunch of money, but you want to be the one to do it. And so put everything that you can that will convey that message onto this slide. And when I say everything, I don't actually mean everything. Remember, you don't want to make it overly complicated. So choose the right bit of information to put in this slide. And then now, lastly, the last slide in your deck is your ask. Again, this is something that is very often overlooked. Make sure you include how much money you are fundraising. If your plan is to raise between, let's say, 300 to 600, kind of depending on what investor interest is, don't put that on the deck. You need to choose a number. If you do too big of a range, investors just see it as being a little like wishy-washy. Also, do not include your valuation on the deck. The valuation, actually, this is something that we're going to mention in like 2 slides from now. You don't want it, you want to get them enough, again, to feel excited. Sorry, I'm saying the word excited so much in this presentation, but hopefully that is one of the 7 things that will be on your mind when you end this presentation that you will remember. But anyway, you want to get them to feel excited. You don't want to give them a reason to kill the conversation before it's even begun. So sometimes giving too much information, investors will start spotting problems, and you don't want them to get to that point yet. Right now, you just focus on the excitement. So if you include valuation, that can be something when they're just like, oh no, that valuation is too high. No, I'm out. When you're like, oh, hey, that valuation is negotiable. And realistically, all valuations are negotiable. Don't include it. And then also include a little breakdown of how you're planning to spend the money, X percentage on hires, X% on tech, marketing, whatever. And then the key milestones that you will achieve with the funding. So at the end of 18 months, if you're planning to fundraise for 18 months, we plan to hit the following milestones, A, B, and C, and then name and contact information. Okay, sorry, that was a lot of information. The few things you want to remember: make sure each slide has a clear takeaway. Make sure it's clear what your company name is. Again, that can be forgotten a lot, especially if you have a different product name and your company name, things get confusing. And then try, especially if you're a consumer facing company, but honestly, if you're anyone now, if we have access to tools like Canva, which are so cheap and easy to use, your branding needs to look decent. Like, this is something that you're sending out. Even if you want a graphic design expert, just spend that extra few hours to polish it up and make it look pretty and nice. Okay. If you have to, this is kind of going back to what we were saying about the valuation. The more you have to explain, the more reasons people can say no. So that's why you don't want to include things in, can we go to the next slide? In like your financial forecast, you don't need to include your full financial forecast. Let the investor come to you and say, oh, hey, I'm super interested. Can you send me your financials? And at that point, you hopefully already have it pre-prepared and you can send it, rather than trying to include like a whole screenshot of a spreadsheet, and people put like their 5-year financial projection on the deck. And it's a pain to look at. No one actually really looks at it, and it makes you look like you are new to the game. So please get that out. Product roadmap, if you're going to include one of the two, might be a little more common. But you can include that in an appendix instead. One last thing, actually, before we go into a few quick examples, and then I'll pass it over to Perdie, is one challenge that we see a lot for founders is if you have a really big vision and the first, let's say, 18 months of your company might be a little confusing. Like, let's say your big vision, I'm not even going to try to do an example. But if you have a big vision and you're starting small, it can be really difficult to convey what you're fundraising for and why the product that you're fundraising for matters without, like, if you try to talk about the big vision, it might get investors excited, but then you're probably going to hear, oh, it sounds like you're trying to do everything at once. Versus if you talk about the thing that you're just trying to focus on at the moment, investors might say, this is kind of a small problem, like, what's the big vision? And so a good way to balance that problem, or a good way to solve that problem, is to talk about the big vision quickly at the start and say, we see this is the problem. We see in 5 years from now, our company looking like this, operating this. And yes, I know what you're thinking. Probably sounds like we're trying to do everything. I just want to give you how we see the future. And now I'm going to talk you through the next 18 months and how we're going to get there. And that's also your opportunity to tie in the product roadmap as well. Again, it's going to come down to storytelling, which Perdie will chat about shortly. Okay. A few really, really quick examples. So you want to be very, very explicit about what you say. Oh, I forgot the slide, about the slide. A few details on text. This is just some neuroscience interesting stuff that we found. Helvetica works best for communication in 100-point text. Use a max 2 colors to get your point across. Again, this isn't our personal, like, design taste. It's just some interesting neuroscience bits that we found. And express the obvious, be as explicit as possible. And so a good example here would be, instead of just putting a graph like this, where you see the monthly revenue is increasing 50% each month, both show it on the graph and say monthly revenue is increasing 50% per month. Another example would be, if you're a founder with a lived experience with the problem, investors love to see that. Be explicit about that. Don't just hint it when you talk about your experience. Put it in big, clear font. And then, references, if you want to check out where we pulled that information from, here are the references. I just saw a question that said, can we get slides? These slides sent to you? Yes, absolutely. They'll be sent to you afterwards. So again, please say anything that any point that you want to get across. Make sure there is 0 margin for error of something being, like, miscommunicated. Just be super clear. And then lastly, don't use too much jargon. Please, please, please. Like, it sometimes sounds like people are talking in different languages when they give the pitch. And it needs to be, like, you should be able to explain it to a 10-year-old and they'll understand it. Someone in an entirely different industry and they'll totally understand it. More jargon doesn't make you sound experienced. It makes you sound less experienced. Okay, we will end it there and I'll pass it off to Perdie.
Hey everyone, just to reiterate what Emma said, I last week looked through 50 pitch decks that was sent to an angel investor that we work very closely with, and we were just reading through them as well. And honestly, over 50% didn't have an ask slide. So you go all the way through their deck. Oh, they're solving a really good problem. I like the idea of their solution. And then it's like, are they even fundraising? Like, why are they sending me this deck? What do they want from me? And slides like the ask slide not being on there, outside of the fact that there is no context now as to what the founders actually want, it just completely changes how an investor might view your business opportunity. So do put all of those slides in, even if you think they're not important. And like the TAM slide, TAM Samsung, like Emma was saying, it can be a bit like bullshit. You know, the numbers are all getting pulled from somewhere. You can change your pricing. You can put the billions in that they want. If you just think there's no point even having this slide because it's pointless and you don't have it, then investors will have a problem with it not being there, despite the fact that they click past it really quickly because they know that all the numbers can be manipulated. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to talk a bit about the storytelling element of the 11 slides, and it will kind of feed off everything that Em was just saying, especially in relation to the fact that you need to get investors to feel something. So again, back to the neuroscience, our brains are wired to remember and connect with stories more effectively than facts and figures. And a lot of times people have gathered a lot of different facts and stats, and they're putting that into their slide deck to prove that they're really well researched. And whilst proving that they're really well researched and they've got all these numbers and they've investigated everything and they're the absolute expert in this problem and why their solution addresses the problem, they then lose a little bit of the storytelling element. And then it's just harder to kind of keep the reader engaged with what it is that you're building. So we've worked with a lot of actors over our time supporting startups, and they're really good at understanding how to tell a story. So for everyone that's into movies or TV shows, books, plays, there is a consistent story arc that almost every good book, movie, or play follow. It all revolves around three different things, which is a bit of context setting, a conflict, and a conclusion, resolution/conclusion. And that's exactly how you should be telling your story in your pitch deck as well. So before you even start, you need to set the context about your hero. And then in your situation, your hero is not yourself as the startup, your hero is your customer. So how is your customer currently operating in the world? That's where you start talking about the problem as well. How are they currently solving the problem? Why do they have the problem? Who is the hero? What's their backstory? Do you have any customer personas? Just make people really resonate with a human behind the problem. They then encounter a problem and that problem can't be fixed with the current available tools. So a lot of the times people will say that if you're solving a problem, they will be solving it in a way, but it's not solving it correctly. So there might be a really long-winded, buggy, expensive, or something they're using which like half solves the problem, and your solution is coming along to address the full problem. So that hero will be out looking for different solutions that address their problem. And then at the top of the story arc, they then find the solution, which would be your product. They then notice that they're not alone. There are a lot of other people who want to solve a similar problem. And that hero helps other heroes along their own kind of hero journey. And what that would mean for you is that they become like an ambassador for your business. They're a promoter. They're positively recommending you to other people that they know are having the same problem. And then you kind of reach your resolution, which is the hero is using your product. They're happy. They're promoting it. And then they can go on either to that's the end of their story, or maybe they encounter another problem. And then you've got a different feature set or a different product or something else comes along and it helps them address that secondary problem that they have. So the story arc can just keep going and going, but you need to take investors on this kind of train of thought so that they can really understand who the hero is and how your solution is going to address their problem, and just give them that sense of resolution at the end, because our brains are wired that we want to always close the circuit. We want to have the resolution. So the elements of the story arc to remember: who the main characters are within your story, and your main characters are going to be your customers, who are your hero, and then your company. Then there is always an element of conflict in any good film, play, movie, etc. And the conflict in your situation is the problem that you're addressing and really how bad that problem is, and make people feel the pain of that problem. Then you've got the setting. So what conditions the market is operating in, who the competitors are, all of that kind of stuff is the setting. And then the resolution. So the resolution is your solution and how it addresses the problem. And you can then communicate any trial users, beta users that you've had, testimonials that they had the problem and their problem has now gone away because you have addressed it with your amazing product. So if you want to see those in action across the 11 slides that you have on your pitch deck, the 11 slides down the left-hand side here that Em just went through, you start with the context setting and introducing your characters. So you'll be talking about that in the introduction slide, you'll be talking about that in the problem slide. When you introduce the conflict, that's also in the problem slide. So again, make investors feel the pain that your customer is facing. A really good way of doing that is having testimonial or like a quote from your ideal customer talking about the problem with a picture of their face, because then an investor is looking at another human saying, I really feel this problem. If you're going to try and get empathy out of an investor, having a real person talking, like the voice of your customer saying what the problem is a really easy way to get investors to just really feel it. The market conditions and the setting. So that is the business model, the go-to-market, the competition. So what conditions are you operating in? How are you going to reach people? Where do they tend to be? Who else is operating in this space? That kind of thing. And then how your solution addresses the problem. Even though you mention your solution up front in your slide, you bring it back in the why now. Because we'll talk a bit about traction dipping in a little bit, but the why now will be because it's a good time for the market, because you're the right people, and because you've solved the problem for a few beta testers or something like that in the past. And you know that you can do it at scale, and you need the money to be able to do so. If you want to break it down a bit further, there's 3 things that an investor is thinking when they're looking through every single deck. So they'll be thinking, why should I care? Why should I believe you? And why should I join you? So the why should I care should all be set out in those first few slides. They should care because it is a huge problem that has impact on a lot of people and has the potential to kind of change people's lives. Why should I believe you? Is because you've done the research, you've tested your solution, your product with a few different users, and they really like it, because you really understand your market that you're operating in, you understand who the other players are, you understand the competition, you know what business model is going to work, you've got a go-to-market strategy, you've got the traction. So that's all giving them validation that they should believe what it is that you're saying. And why should I join you will be because the team is the right team to build this. You've got the right skill set, the right lived experience, whatever it is, to make this a success outside of any other team that might be building something similar. And because now is the right time, and because you're asking for an amount of money and you're going to spend it in a way that matches what they think would address the problem and what the solution is. We're going to talk a little bit more about the intro slide. So if you remember, slide 1 is just the introduction slide. There is a lot of people that do not use this real estate at all. If you've got 11 slides, it's almost 10% of your entire deck. It's also the very first thing that an investor is going to see. So if you just put pitch deck in massive words across that slide, it's a complete waste. They know it's a pitch deck. It's a deck and they've just received it and they're an investor. So it's likely to be a pitch deck. So instead, use that slide to set the scene. In order to do so, that opening slide should have 4 things. It should have impact. It should have a hook, which piques the investor's interest. And that hook is normally a one-liner. So a really clear, simple, visionary one-liner. And that's something that gives the investor an indication of what it is that they're just about to read. So Emma was just talking now about the difference between a huge vision and what you're actually going to do with that first pot of money. And this is where you would communicate the big vision. So you start off with something really bold, really visionary, and then step 1 of that bold vision is what your pre-seed round is going to help you achieve. Or across your bold vision, this is what the seed round is going to help you achieve. So they're not expecting you to achieve your whole vision with 150K raise or a 500K raise, but they want to know that you have the vision. So a few examples of some different visions from companies that you would have heard of, just so you know how simple and bold it can be. So N26, this is one of their original pitch decks, and their one-liner is just the future of banking, and they've got a product shot on there. If you were to look at this deck for the very first time, you know that this is going to be a fintech business before you've even started, and you know that it's something that people can use their smartphone for. So that intrigues you, it piques your interest, it makes you want to continue reading and understanding how this brand is going to create the future of banking. It seems something that's like different to what we've all seen in the past. Uber, when they were called Uber Cab, this was their first slide deck on their pitch deck. So next generation car service, again, they're looking into the future. You get the idea that it's something that's going to be different to how things are done in the past. It must be something to do with smartphones because there's an iPhone and a BlackBerry there. You know it's to do with cars. You don't exactly know how, but it's got Uber Cab in the name. So maybe something about taxis. Like just with only 5 words, it gives you such a clear indication of what you're going to be reading. It piques your interest and it keeps you excited. Dropbox, moving the world's files, Bright MD, automating healthcare delivery, bed and breakfast, book rooms with locals rather than hotels. So have a think about what that one-liner could be for you that communicates the vision, is really bold. You can see that they've used simple language, like Em said, no jargon, no industry terms, just something you give it to your mum, you give it to a 5-year-old, they'll be able to read it and kind of understand where this might be going. If you're kind of in an environment where you're in a room and you're pitching it live and you just got this intro slide in front of you and you want to just kind of like get the ball rolling for how you start presenting your slide deck, just start talking about the big and urgent problem that you're solving and really give a scale of how big and how urgent it is, and then why you came across this problem and why it's so important for you to solve this problem. All investors know that the likelihood is that you're going to be working on this business for the next decade. So they have to see that you're really passionate about solving the problem. I'm sure a lot of you have heard people say, like, don't be in love with your problem, but with your product, be in love with the problem that you're solving, because your product is going to iterate and things are going to change. But the thing that's not going to change is the problem that you're solving. So the investors really have to like feel the passion that you have to solve the problem, because you're going to need that passion to keep going through everything that is about to come. There's also something called traction dipping, which you may or may not have heard of, but after seeing thousands and thousands of pitches, honestly, people that do traction dipping, they come across so well. When you just see a slide deck and they've done this well, it just gets you so excited and you like maintain that excitement level throughout the whole pitch. So there's obviously a traction slide, which we've mentioned, and people tend to put the traction slide towards the end of the deck, which means up until that point, you haven't really given investors an opportunity to get excited. Traction dipping is about building credibility right at the beginning of your pitch and all the way through your pitch. So you don't have to wait until the traction slide to start building it. So if you want to think about how you might do traction dipping, here's a few slides where you can start mentioning traction, even on the intro slide, problem slide. So we've actually seen people who slide number 1, they're talking about everything that they've achieved to date. And then the context that you've just been set is these guys are good. Like they're already building it. They're already doing it. They've already got customers. They've already got revenue. They've already got this, this, and this. And then you go through the whole rest of the deck with that in your mind. You read it in a totally different way than if you were to read it as an ideation style deck. So it doesn't matter what traction you have, or if you are at pre-seed or just raising friends and family, like what can you talk about that looks like traction, signs of traction, even at the very early stages. So it might be when you're talking about the problem that you're solving, how many customers have you talked to about the problem? So that doesn't have to be revenue. It doesn't have to be anyone particularly using a product if you haven't developed the product yet. But you can just say, I've spoken to 1,000 people about this. Like we spoke to 1,000 people, all of whom are on our wait list, and all of them say that this problem is not currently being addressed and they are actively looking for a solution. And then investors are thinking, okay, they've already got a market here and they're starting to develop that market. They're starting to understand the customer that can help them whilst they're building their marketing messaging, etc. You've just mentioned it up front and it changes the way that the investor will perceive the rest of the deck. Again, if you have got to the point where you've got someone that's signed a letter of intent, you've got some freemium users, even if they're using a very early beta version of the platform, or you've got a completely tech-free version of offering the solution where you're just using spreadsheets in the background, like investors want to see that you can do a lot with a little. And you can do a lot with a little nowadays because there's so much tech that's available to you for free. So can you start collecting things? Can you start collecting wait lists? Can you have a really simple website where you're just collecting email addresses? Like what can you do to prove that you've got some early adopters, you've got some free users, you've got some people that are bought into your idea. And then with business model and go to market, a bit like Em said, you can say like, oh, I'm going to use influencers and I'm going to put it on social media. A lot of investors will think you're just going to try it and see is there any evidence to support that this method is going to be the right method for you? Have you done any little tests? Have you spoken to your users about how they currently receive information? If you've already spoken to 1,000 customers and those customers say that TikTok is the platform that they use the most, and that's why we're using TikTok, then it makes sense. There's some kind of logic that follows your go-to-market strategy. So do you have logic? Do you have evidence? Like, how can you prove that the strategy that you're going to do is going to be successful, rather than like, we're going to spend money on paid advertising or marketing and like hope that it works, which is how people see it if you haven't put any evidence in. And you can get through all of that before you've got to a traction slide. Another few things to think about when storytelling. So you'll see that on people's slide deck, it might be like problem, solution, market opportunity. Rather than just having that as your titles, you can use the titles to tell the story. So your title might be 100 million people are currently struggling with their mental health, or, you know, something like, is there a figure that you can pull out from your stats about your problem slide and use that as a big headline on your deck, so that people see the scale of the problem rather than just seeing the word problem and then everything else in smaller text? And if you want to make sure that your narrative does flow, there's something called the dropped paper test, which basically is, if you had your whole deck, you printed it out, and you gave it to an investor and they dropped it on the floor, do you reckon they'd be able to put your deck back in order without your help and without page numbers? So does it flow nicely from the problem that you're solving to how your solution addresses that problem, to how many people have the problem, the market opportunity, to how you're going to charge these people? You know, it should flow so nicely that an investor just sees how it all goes together, and can understand it in any order, even without you pitching it. Sometimes investors might just ask to meet for a chat though. So there's a lot of investors, especially now, that they're getting a bit bored with the whole pitch deck thing. They just want to meet for coffee, or maybe you're at an event and they just say, tell me about your business. And you don't have your slides to rely on. You don't have to go through an 11-slide process. You just want to kind of have a conversation and keep it a little bit more informal. The tip here is to focus on the founder story. And if you are going to focus on the founder story, you need to be able to confidently answer the below questions. So why do you care about the problem that you're solving? So if you're saying I'm building X, and the reason why is because I'm really passionate about solving the problem, and it might be because you had that problem yourself. You used to work in a company and the company had the problem. Like, why are you building this? Why are you going to spend the next decade of your life focused on solving this problem? If you can communicate that well, it's good, because the investor is assessing how you think and how you see the world. How did you get to the place that you are now? So a lot of investors might ask about your prior work history. It doesn't have to relate to your startup. So it doesn't have to be that you worked in the industry and now you're building for that industry, but just who you are and how you got to where you are now helps an investor understand your personality and a bit more about your background, and look out for traits that they find attractive, which might just be perseverance, tenacity, ability to overcome challenges. So again, don't worry if you're building a startup in a totally new space to what you were working on before. You might be able to bring out some examples of how you have been able to do this kind of thing before, launch into a brand new industry, or learn something completely from scratch. Like, you can bring in, it's a bit like an interview question, bring in all of those past experiences and how they help you get to where you are now. And then what makes you special, which is kind of the awkward one that people don't really like bragging about themselves and tend to be overly humble. But investors know that you have to be confident in who you are. You get a lot of knockbacks. There are some personality traits which make being a founder a bit easier. So just kind of get comfortable with understanding exactly what your skill set is and what you as a founding team bring to the table. So this would be what's on your team slide, but if you don't have a team slide, you have to be able to articulate it instead, just verbally. So why are you the ones that are going to win? Why are you the right team to bring this product to market now? And can you articulate that? And just remember, we've said this at the beginning as well, but people won't remember what you said or did, but they'll remember how you made them feel. You want them to feel excited. You want them to feel really confidently informed. A lot of investors are generalists. You might pitch some specialist investors, but the majority of them are generalists. So you're going to be more expert than they are in your particular field, or you should be. You should have more knowledge than they do about how your problem presents and how you're going to solve it. And you also want them to want to work with you. I'm sure you've all heard that the investor founder relationship is like marriage. You're going to be in it for the long haul. They're going to want to be kind of brainstorming with you at 11 p.m. on the phone when something goes wrong, and spend the next X amount of months and years in board meetings and making intros for you. So they're going to want to know that you are the right people for them to work with. Another few references here about the art of storytelling and how you can use storytelling to craft a pitch and the narrative arc, etc. We'll send through these slides, like we said, so you can click on those links if you want any more info. I'll stop there.
We had a few really good questions come in that I was going to type responses in on the chat, but I think they require a little more context for the answer. And I know we're about 1 minute until we need to be done, so we'll try to go through these questions really quickly, and then we might go a few minutes over. If you do have any other questions, feel free to add them in the chat now. First question from Andrew. He said, I've heard others say the problem slide must be quantified in a financial amount, or at least be the time wasted, so like an hour amount. Do you agree based on investor feedback? Wouldn't say it has to be that way, not black or white, but if you can include those numbers, definitely makes a big difference. Another good question came in, said, would you recommend, I'm seeing AvRev, I'm guessing annual revenue, as what, oh sorry, average revenue, as what a person is willing to spend or already spending on solving the problem, or what if you have validated price point of your product? I'm not sure exactly what slide this is referring to. It might be when it comes to total addressable market calculations, or just when it comes down to pricing revenue. If you do already have traction and you are able to include the average revenue that customers spend with you, that's absolutely fantastic. Please do that. If it's just based on projections, you haven't even launched yet, to be honest, it often comes across as quite wishy-washy. So I would probably not include that in your like total addressable market side, or even average revenue as a benchmark that you're using in your financial figures. I think that's still probably a little too early to include. But do you have anything you want to add on
that? No, if you want to take yourself off mute and add any more context, then feel free, and then we can add more then. But if not, yeah, let's move on to the next one.
I had a question on someone saying they also have problems with pricing. We don't have any upcoming sessions on that. We do have a lot of good replays on our YouTube channel, and I'm not just saying that because we're trying to increase our YouTube subscriber count. So if you haven't subscribe to it. But we have a really good session with Ben Drury, who's the founder of Yoto Play. Check out that. And then we also have a session with our session with the founder of Strava on pricing. It's not live, so it's not on YouTube, but we have a session, I think, with Anthony on seed legals on pricing as well. I would start there. And then one of the questions that I wanted to make sure that we added a bit of context on, there's two questions from Christian, one about ticket size and then one about communicating pivots. Really good question. This is difficult. There's no one size fits all when you have to talk about traction, but the traction comes from a pivot. It depends whether or not you're doing the pitch verbally or whether or not the deck is standalone. If it's standalone, I would probably lean more towards doing one or two things. One, you could have a slide that talks about your journey up until now, in which case you could talk a little bit about the road to get you where you were today. And in that case, if you do that slide, you want to make sure that you show investors that you respond quickly to customer feedback, and that too, you act really fast. So you can have a slide talking about your journey, or what you can do is kind of start fresh and talk about, if you're only going to talk about the future, do not talk about revenue from the past. If it's from a totally different revenue source that is completely irrelevant now, you kind of just have to let that go. But if you're doing the pitch verbally, that's when you can use the storytelling element and talk about how you've gotten to where you are today. And then you can pull those numbers in and make a lot more sense than if you were just sending it, or if you were just sending it as a standalone deck. Perdie, anything to add there?
Just that investors are like very used to people pivoting. Like it happens all the time. So focus, if you're going to talk about a pivot, talk about what you learned from the pivot. And did you manage to maintain any of the customers or anything like that? So it might be that the revenue model is different, but the customer group is still the same and they're going to pay you in your new revenue or something. So you can always spin it in a way that it's not like it hasn't been a complete waste of time, but it's been an opportunity for you to get more clarity on like the customer group, the problem, how you're solving the problem, your solution, etc.
And then last question, also from Christian, would you prefer a ticket size on raising? Even VCs operate more in syndicates at the moment. I'm guessing it's asking whether or not you should include the minimum ticket size on the ask slide. You can. I would probably avoid putting that on just because if someone comes in under, like, let's say you put your min ticket size as 20 and they were thinking 15, again, if it's going to kill the conversation, there's just no point including it. If you get someone who's really interested in, let's say, their min ticket size is 5, but all is 5K, or your min ticket is 20, but they want to come in at 5. If you've had for the conversations with people who have the same thing, you can perhaps get them to come together and, an SPV or something and come in as 20K with one name on your cap table. So just don't do anything to kill the conversation unless you're in a position where you can do that and you have so much interest, it doesn't matter. And you'd rather just reduce the number of conversations you have, include it then. No one size fits all, but in general, wouldn't do it.
We've got a session with Anthony from Seed Legals, and he'll cover a lot more of that kind of stuff. But I think his rule of thumb is you can probably manage 50 investors on your cap table before you'd start using like a crowdfunding site, which is when you've got multiple hundreds of investors who are it's quite hard to communicate with them all on a like one-on-one basis when you've got that many. And we also did a session with Engin before he's coming in as well. He's an investor, and he showed this really interesting chart about like different ticket sizes and how they bring in more tickets between them. And there was one raise where an investor that came in for £1,000 introduced a friend who invested 5,000, who introduced a friend who invests 5,000, who introduced a VC fund who invested 200,000. Like, don't just think about that individual, but think about the chain of how many people they could introduce you to and what that could mean. And if you're happy to manage that relationship, like if you like the person, you're happy to work with them, you're going to be messaging them back and forth. Like I said, you're going to have a relationship with them, but it's only £1,000 ticket. It could still be worth it. So it's up to you. I think that's it.
We'll wrap it there. If you have any questions, you know where to find us. And again, the sessions Hotbed summer is designed to be drop in, drop out. So come to the sessions that are most relevant for you. If something's not relevant for you, don't come. Or if something you think is like 25% relevant for you, you can watch the recording. There's no pressure. Use the content in the way that's going to help you the most. And again, reach out if there's anything we can do to help you in the meantime. And yeah, thanks
Stick around. Yeah, stick around for a minute or two if anyone has any questions about Hotbed Summer. Now, yeah, otherwise drop us an email. I'm going to stop recording.
If you do have a question, please take yourself off mute. Otherwise, in about a minute or so, if no one has